Consider supporting this podcast on Patreon. On this episode of the What is Asia podcast, I sit down with Regine Calaquian to talk about American perceptions of China and how they've evolved in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as its social and political implications. Regine, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, no problem. It's nice to help you out.
Yeah. So just, I guess, start off by telling me a little bit about what got you so interested in China. Why did you travel to China? And what stimulated your interest in your specific research project? So there's 3 questions there, and you can parse that apart however you want.
Okay, well, let me start when I was in my undergrad. So I was doing my undergrad in America here in Delaware, and I took up the major, which was 3 languages. It's a specialty in my university. So one of them was obviously Chinese, and then the other 2 were Spanish and Japanese. So I had a couple opportunities, and I studied abroad and to study those languages. And one of them was going to China for a semester, and I ended up really liking it. And I saw there was so many opportunities. So when I came back from studying abroad in China, I decided to continue that because I saw, the opportunities and like the progress I could do there. So after I graduated my bachelor's, I applied for a scholarship, but this wasn't like the scholarship for my master's that I'm doing right now. So at that time, it was the language year. So I went there for the language year, and then I decided like I really like it being there in Xiamen, and so I decided to continue into my master's because I saw there was even more opportunities. And being a foreigner, you have lots of opportunities being in China. So I applied for another scholarship, which was for my master's. So yeah, I was really interested in and I see the struggles that foreigners have learning Chinese, especially if it's different. Like, for Westerners, we don't have like this kind of characters to learn from. So I just really want to help people learn Chinese instead of from a foreigner perspective, because usually it's native Chinese teachers, like native Chinese speakers who teach, right? So it's a little bit hard when you're a foreigner and they're like, you're struggling, but the Chinese teachers just don't quite understand the struggle. So I would like to, put my perspective into it and help those people who are Westerners, learn a little bit better, and I can feel their struggles, and I feel like I have some ways that I can teach them in a little bit differently than native speakers.
And so I guess for those who have never traveled to China, or I guess never traveled to East Asia in general, I mean, I already know what you're talking about, but for people who maybe haven't traveled there, what do you mean by the struggles of having to learn Chinese in China? Like, what are specifically some of those struggles that
Well,
certain
one of
foreign students
them,
might deal with?
right, one of them is like the tones. Obviously, we don't have, the tones, the 4 tones, or maybe 5 in Mandarin. So that's a new concept for them. Also, I see that people struggle a lot with like the tongue placement and how like it's your mouth is supposed to be formed when you say certain like consonants that's not really found in English. Because I remember I was trying to teach my brother how to say this, and he said, I don't even know how to pronounce that. So it's like you have to teach them how to say it in a certain way, and like the tones with it too makes it even more complicated because they just never had to do that. And this is different from like if you were from another like Asian countries with tones, you would have the idea of like the tone kind of thing, but we don't have that in English.
Yeah, and I think from a pedagogical standpoint too, maybe um, the teacher sees their role as being a little bit different than the way a teacher at a US university might see their role. Like, at least for me in my experience, what I noticed was jarringly different. And not necessarily to say that one strategy is better or worse than the other, but I think that definitely some students coming from the US struggled with the different pedagogical practices. And what I mean by that is that the language teaching in the US seemed to be a lot more student centered. So there was a lot more practice in between student to student. There were a lot more activities, but it seemed to me like when I was studying there, the concept is more you're just sitting at the table and the teacher is just kind of lecturing the entire time. And so you're getting a lot of listening practice, but it seemed to be there was less emphasis on speaking. And so I can imagine that some students probably struggled in that sense as well.
Yeah, so like you said, it's more traditional with their learning in China, just lectured and you just listen to the teacher. Yeah, I see how like a lot of students struggle with that, especially if you're not used to just learning in that one way and you don't really have an option to choose like, hey, can we do class differently? Or, you can't really say that to the teacher compared to like in America, it's more like, a little more vibrant and different ways to teach to cater to all learning types. And yeah, I feel like, it's a little bit of a disadvantage, especially if you're not used to it or you just don't learn that way. So some students might not get the full, experience and like really grasp the language in that way.
Yeah. So I guess jumping into your research a little bit more, can you just give like an introductory abstract, like if you were giving an elevator pitch to someone about what your project is, and just a few sentences, what is it that you're doing specifically?
Sure. So my research is called like Americans' view on China's image. So this is basically like I'm surveying Americans on how they see China, like their general opinions, like how do you see their government? How do you see the Chinese people, the society, things like that. So all this research is to, based on this research is to promote how to promote Chinese language in America, because they we have the Confucius Institutes, but I'm sure you've heard of the state that the Confucius are now, so they're like
Right.
closed, have
And
already closed.
yeah. So I mean, for those who don't know, the Confucius Institute has been sort of a contentious sticking point, particularly with the Department of Defense, where they've suspected, I think, and I don't remember the exact details, but I think there was one employee at the University of Chicago who was the Department of Defense had suggested may have been a spy, and so they ended up shutting that down. And there was sort of a domino effect, including at my university, the University of Oregon, where they had said, "Hey, you have to shut down, otherwise we're going to withhold funding," which is precisely what happened. So it definitely seems like um, Chinese language influence through Chinese institutions is sort of waning at the moment.
Right.
Um, but anyway, yeah, go ahead. You were saying.
Yeah, so it's like the Confucius Institutes are almost like a bridge between, the country and China. So without this, then it's a little bit hard to connect with China and, having opportunities to go there. There's lesser opportunities now. So I'm doing this research to, how can we promote more of the Chinese language in America? I know we have bilingual schools and immersion programs, but it's not prominent enough, and it doesn't help that America is so far away from China, compared to other Asian countries who are closer to China. They have more opportunities and their culture may be a little bit more similar. And I found from my research that, since we're more like farther away and we're different in like culture standpoint, there's no need to learn about China. There's no need to really learn Chinese if you don't need to in America.
Yeah, and I want to get into this a little bit later, but I guess I'll allude to it by saying it seems like especially now, um, the US is sort of going back to being a little bit more inward looking, this notion of, okay, well, we have a lot of problems here. We just need to focus on this now. And so there doesn't seem to be as much of an emphasis as prior to the beginning of 2020, where there may have been more of an outlook to
Right.
the outside world. In your research, though, so I guess demographically, who are you interviewing? I mean, are you getting a mix between men, women, different generations of people? Is it a pretty comprehensive study, or are you mostly interviewing younger people who might be more likely to just go study abroad in China?
Right. So actually, in my research, it's about half and half. The amount of women and the amount of men I've that have taken my survey, it's half and half really. But as for the age, there's a lot of younger people, definitely. Like 50% is like 18 to 29 years old, and then the rest of it is a little older. So actually, it's not a bad mix. It's good. It's not, too many young people, but there's some older people as well.
Mhm. And I guess we'll kind of start to dive into the specifics here. So when you started your research, did you start interviewing people prior to 2020, or have all of these interviews taken place um, March 2020 and moving forward?
Yeah, it's moving forward from March 2020. So this is pretty recent.
I see. So yeah, you would then gain a very particular perspective from people who are maybe thinking a lot more about China as a
Yeah.
result of the coronavirus, as opposed to like if you had interviewed before then. And so it's interesting then in the sense that um, are people uh, do people generally sway toward a more negative view of China, or does it uh, are there some people who maintain a positive view, or is it neutral? I guess you can sort of dive into that, and maybe you can talk about between men and women, between younger generation and older generation. What are some of the divides there too, if you've been able to parcel that apart in your research?
Okay. So let me start with the view according to like the coronavirus that's happened. Actually, that was really surprising. About 60% of the people who took my survey, they actually said the COVID didn't really change their view on China. It didn't really affect their life or any part of their, just everyday lives. But there was more negative views, like that they were affected by COVID. So that, this is, yeah, the negative part was a little bit more than the positive part and how they see China. So that sounds a little bit sad, but for the most part, no one really changed, for better or for worse on their opinion of China. So that's pretty nice. As for the other one, I'm not actually sure, like, you know, the different thoughts between the younger people and the older people. But what I can say is when I was interviewing some people, you can really tell that there's a difference between interviewing those who have been to China and those who have not been to China. So those who have, been to China, they see
And
a
can you
lot.
say, like, generally speaking, like what percentage of people that you interviewed have been to China versus not?
I'd say like not quite half, but like, a little under half. So, maybe 20-25% ish. But yeah, generally in my research, not many people have been to China, but a good amount though. But I mean, yeah, you can tell there's quite a difference between those who have been there and those who have not. The ones who I've interviewed who have not been there, they don't have much to say about China. Usually it skews a little bit like more positive actually than negative, so that's pretty good. And also they wouldn't really comment much because they would just say like, oh, I'm not sure, I don't want to comment, I don't want to stereotype. But versus like, those who have interviewed, they have so much more to say, which is like some more negative, some more positive.
And I do want to note too, your survey was anonymous. So, I mean, these people had no reason to hold back if they had any, which I am kind of surprised about in a sense, because you had mentioned that, you know, some of the participants had said, oh, well, my life wasn't really affected that much. And that kind of comes as a surprise to me, because I think, well, you know, surely a lot of these people must have been working or going to school, so it has impacted their life in some way. But yet that hasn't seemed to have influenced their opinion too strongly in a negative way. Were you able to delve into like specifically why they maintain a positive view? I mean, I think it comes to be a little more obvious why they might have a negative view of China, but I think it's might be less obvious when you know, people's lives have been so considerably impacted, why they maintain a positive view. So can you go into that a little more?
Sure. So actually, it's a little bit funny because when I looked into the responses of why, how did it affect you positively? Because usually you would think that it's negatively. Actually, it was positive because they said that I get to stay at home, I get to work at home. So for them, it's actually really nice, like they get to work remotely, and like I guess for them this is really nice. I guess if you want to save on your commute and all the hassle. Yeah, a lot of people said like their workplace, they had to change it to remotely, and they like this a lot better. They work so much better at home, being with their family and not having to drive however long they have to drive. But yeah, they really like this part, working from home, and how their job changed to like, okay, you can come to the office but you don't have to. And I guess like, people really like that part.
Yeah. So I guess thinking then about people that uh, held negative views, can you go into a little bit more detail? I mean, maybe it's not necessarily just about the virus. You know, maybe they have certain conceptualizations about China politically, economically. Certainly, Donald Trump, the previous president, had shed a lot of light on certain aspects of you know, Chinese politics and economics that a lot of Americans might not deem palatable. So has maybe Trump's politics or the coronavirus or some other element factored into their negative views of China?
Yeah, definitely. The politics and the previous president, definitely, it affected a lot of the views of Americans. So yeah, the president was one of them. Also, like the human rights, and like, from the Uyghurs, maybe you've heard about. And also just, yeah, a lot of it was human rights. Some of them mentioned about Hong Kong. And then the few that knew about the Confucius Institutes, they also mentioned a little bit about that, how it affected, them negatively. Um, what else? Yeah, those were the main ones, at least in the survey that I could see. And also, I don't know if you remember like the TikTok and WeChat being banned, or the speculation from last year. So people were like a little bit talking about it, not as much because people don't really know about WeChat, at least in here in America.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So Trump had something to say about WeChat and TikTok. And I think especially the younger generation is very familiar with what TikTok is. Uh, but they might not be as familiar with what WeChat is. So can you explain what is WeChat? And then can you explain what was the controversy with these two applications, and why did they factor into those people's negative views?
Yeah, so WeChat is like an app, like a messaging app that a lot of the primarily the Chinese people use in China. You can use it to pay, like, with like Apple Pay and Samsung Pay. You can buy groceries, you can pay your phone bill. Basically, it's just an all-around app to use in your everyday life besides talking to people. And the reason why there was so much about it in America with Donald Trump was because of the privacy issues. So, it was kind of like the Confucius Institute. The Chinese government maybe is taking your data. So you might have heard about that with TikTok as well.
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of concerns about, well, and still are a lot of concerns about spying, but also, censorship, which is something that maybe you and I took note of uh, during our time in China. If you send something that might be deemed controversial politically, it might not reach the person receiving your communications. Um, so I guess I'm also interested in noting, did you, or, and again, I don't remember if I mentioned this at the beginning, your research is still a work in progress. And so there's still ideas that you're still developing, but um, was there any difference that you noticed, maybe if you looked at a racial spectrum, like did certain people, depending on their race, maybe have a different view of China in some way? Or have you not really noticed any particular trend? And then I just wanted to add on top of that, because we mentioned Trump, to put a slightly different spin on it. I don't know if you delved into people's either politics, like what political party they identify with, or their religion, and maybe how that played in some way into their views of China. So those three aspects, and maybe you can tackle one or multiple of them.
Yeah, for the racial aspects, well, because the majority of the respondents for my survey, they were primarily Caucasian, so, you know, the view is skewed to, their bias. But from what I could see, for the most part, they thought of China as like, yeah, they're neutral about it, or they have a good view on it. Of course, there's always some who is, negative about it. But I mean, it's not surprising that I see that some of the Asian races and stuff, they view China in a more positive way, especially if they're Chinese American. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I noticed from it.
Yeah, I want to flip the conversation around a little bit, because I know that you don't, or I don't think that you really deal in looking at Chinese perceptions of the U.S., but you have experience living in China. You still have, uh, friends and colleagues that are living in China, and I'm sure you're in constant communication with them.
Mm.
Um, has perceptions of China that you've taken note of changed toward the U.S. Since the beginning of the coronavirus, or throughout the course of this coronavirus period?
Right. So yeah, from last year when the coronavirus was, really big thing at that time. I mean, it still is now, but there was a lot of, I guess you could say, reverse racism there in China. Maybe you've heard of the stories or not, but let me just go into it a little bit. So, China had the coronavirus and it was spreading, but I don't know, it seems that there was some racism towards foreigners in a negative kind of way, especially towards African Americans. Of course, it's, there's some for Caucasian people too. but like, they would kick them out of apartments, or like, they would lose their jobs because they believed that maybe those foreigners carried the coronavirus into
Right. I
China.
think particularly in Guangzhou, I mean, it may have been in other areas as well, but that's particularly where I've heard about that taking place.
Mhm.
But anyway, go on.
Yeah, it was very odd to me because, it was said that it was started in China, the whole virus. So I'm not sure how the Chinese people were seeing foreigners and being afraid of them and didn't want to talk to them or didn't want to stand next to them or be in the same elevator as them. And they're just like, really be cautious of foreigners and treat them worse. And also, you wouldn't be able to sit down in a restaurant because people would be pointing at you or talking about you, and they would get uncomfortable and don't want you to eat with them in the same area. So it's a little bit weird to me how they came to think that way, like reverse racism kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you've um, heard all that much about, now the Chinese government has been, peddling conspiracy theories that perhaps the virus had come out of a lab in Maryland, which, to the best that I can discern, is completely absurd. But what it does indicate is that, I think they're very conscious that, now that the dust is beginning to settle, the vaccine is out. As of the time that we're recording this, a little over 70 million Americans have at least received the first dose of one of the vaccines. And so the dust is beginning to settle a little bit. And at least what I'm noticing here is that you have politicians and different political groups that are now beginning to sort out the blame now that they have a little bit more time and flexibility to do so. And, you know, because you have more experience living in China than I do, have you noticed any part, or have people that you've been in communication with noticed any particular reaction by people in China? It's a little more open-ended there. If you've you know noticed any particular reaction to the way that the blame is now sort of being shifted around.
I'm not quite sure because it changes a lot in like throughout that time frame. I couldn't even believe that that thing was happening, the racism with the coronavirus towards certain people. So like it's settled down now from what I could hear from my friends who are there, but I mean nothing's really changed that much since, the coronavirus is still here. But yeah, it's pretty the same, yeah, from what I could see.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting time, because this, the coronavirus, what I think it's shown is that it's not only having political ramifications, but oftentimes, when there's political ramifications between the US and Chinese government, such as, when we had the trade war is still going on, but when it was very present in the media, um, there wasn't that much, personal fighting on a social level just between individuals. I certainly never felt any hostility, nor did any foreigners from the US in China present any hostility toward any Chinese citizens. But it seems like, as your research is pointing out, and as we've been discussing, that, these perceptions might be causing, different just racial and social, tensions. And so it'll be interesting to see how this goes forward in the future.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about my research. Like my research is actually part of a series, so it's like like a different country's view on China. There's other countries that have done research on this. So for example, there was one Malaysian's view of China. of course, mine is a little bit different being from a Westerner standpoint, but also with the whole COVID, it really changes it up because it's a lot of the responses are from COVID. So I'm really interested, like, what it would be if COVID wasn't part of, what we have right now, and how the bias would be if it's a little bit different.
Yeah, because it does seem that in a way your study was originally about language and outreach, but it sort of unintentionally turned into a coronavirus
Mm.
survey. And has this been a discussion that you and your academic advisor have talked about, how what is happening has influenced your research? Like, I'm thinking pedagogically, what does the faculty have to say about this at Xiamen? What is your professor even specifically have to say about this?
Right. So I talked with my advisor about this. Like, there's no way I can do this research just, trying not to mention the coronavirus, because a lot of it is, it has the coronavirus, part of it, with whether it's the interview or the survey part. And originally it's supposed to focus on like the history and like how we can improve the promotion of the Chinese language in the country. But, you know, with the whole new situation, I told them like I have to include this, and they were like, "Okay, I guess so." So, it's a little bit complicated, but they understand. It's just, why learn about them if you don't need to?
Hmm. So I just have a couple more questions. So one of them is, you know, just like my advisor told me when I was writing my MA thesis, you know, I kind of had to restructure it at one point because he asked me, well, Nakota, what's your why? It's like, why are you writing this? You know, what is the driving message that, if someone forgets everything about your study, what's the one thing that you would hope that they would remember? And so I guess for you, what is the thematic why of your research that you want people to take away from this?
That's a very good question. I mean, I'm not sure actually, but like since my whole research is about like promotion of Chinese language, actually, what I really want people to take from this is like, you should be open. And actually, it's surprising. People do want to learn more about China. Just there's really no need. So if there's some way that we can, you know, I don't know, maybe have some kind of promotion of Chinese language and their culture in China, I mean, not China, in America somehow, maybe whether it's in our schools to learn more about other countries, I think that would be good. Yeah, the problem with the Confucius Institute, like we said, that would have been, that was originally the bridge between us, China and America. But I'm hoping that we can find another way, like something similar to that, so that we can be open to, um, continue the relationship between China and America.
And then just my concluding question. It's something that I ask everyone who is on the show. Um, you've done a lot of reading, obviously, for your research, and I'd assume at least some of it is English language research. If someone wants to learn more about um, the topic of um, you know, maybe linguistics, Chinese linguistics, language acquisition, uh, language pedagogy, or something similar to that. Could you recommend like one or two books that you would encourage people to, go out and maybe check from the library or get off of Amazon if they're interested in knowing more about this?
There's not really a specific book that, I would recommend, because I want people to, choose one that really speaks to them and has their interest. But there is one that in particular that I think of right now. And I've talked with you before about this person. He's someone who went to the Fujian area where we were at, and he was a professor there. He actually wrote a book. The name escapes me right now, but he wrote a book and basically how his life is in China, and he's the first one in that area to get basically the green card to, stay in China. And it's very interesting, and you can read his stories of him being there and being a professor and how everything has really changed for him in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I can edit this part out. If you wanted to look up on your phone real quick, you can.
So yeah.
So,
so the book is actually called Off the Wall: How We Fell for China, and it shows a little family of the professor and his wife and his kids.
Nice. So for anyone that's interested, you can go check out that book. And I think that's going to do it for this episode 4 of the What is Asia podcast. Regine, thanks for coming on the show and sharing your research with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we will see you in the next episode. All right. And